Hello again, and welcome to the InScope podcast. I will be your host today. My name is John Scott. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders over at ScopeStack. If you don't know about ScopeStack, it's a SAO automation platform that automates all your IT services scoping and pricing needs, built for the IT services industry from those of us that were in the IT services industry. So feel free to check it out. But the purpose of today is I am very happy to have from across the ocean, James Davis from Pax8 Asia, director of the academy over there, joining us. James, thanks for waking up early, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast finally.
I know, right? I mean, so James, you and I met, I think it was through like an introduction from someone, but then we just kind of hit it off talking about, right, all this stuff and, you know, the problem that we're trying to solve. It's a problem that you talk to clients all the time about. And again, you said a little while ago, we could talk about this stuff probably all day long, but we're going to limit this to 20 minutes is our goal. So if you're down for that, let's dig into it.
That sounds great. I think it's going to be a challenge to fit this in for 20 minutes, but that's the fun part, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll get you on another podcast too if we need to go longer. So that's fine. Well,
that works for me.
You know, so one of the things that you and I have often talked about is, you know, well, and again, you've had similar conversations to this, and you know, I'll be talking to MSP owners or VAR owners, and you know, we're talking about the statement of work process, if there is one. I mean, and a theme that consistently comes up is it's typically the owner of like a smaller MSP that is still scoping the projects, and then they're the ones responsible for pricing it out, writing the language because they know it'll be right in their minds and they know it'll be accurate. However, that as their business grows, right, that can't always be the owner of the MSP doing that. I mean, tell me about some of the conversations you were having around that same, you know, theme.
Very much that mental barrier that you'll go for a long time actually, where the owner will feel like they need to scope projects out. It's only till they really feel uncomfortable about the technology itself that they stop being involved a lot of the times. And what that does is, more than anything, it stops projects being repeatable, because even though owners feel comfortable in that they're scoping it up and they're capturing everything they feel they should be, often they're really bad at it. I've seen time and time again where an owner will scope up they'll scope up 40 hours, but the project's actually 80, and they wonder why it's never profitable, because they see and think from their perspective what they would do, how they would go about it. They don't take into project management time. They give a bit of a discount to the client. There's a lot that goes into it. And my rule of thumb with most owners has been whatever they're scoping is actually double it, because it's very rarely accurate. And it's just coming from that perspective of when they were doing the work, they're just rushing and doing it and getting it done, and they don't have very good discipline with time entry. Often because they're scoping it in their head, they're not really capturing all the information. They're creating new projects every time, basically, because they're trying to reinvent the wheel. They're a bit of visionary, so they have a bit of fun of being creative in the projects as well. But all the time, that's not a good place to be creative.
No, I mean, you and I have a mutual, you know, friend, Wim, over at Top Left, and like he was telling a story the other day about how he almost lost his MSP because of an underscope project, right? And like, you know, scoped X amount of hours and it was double that amount, and it was a scary moment, you know. And so I think that just kind of reiterates your point, right? And you actually said, you know, visionary, but like, I don't know if you were referencing like the EOS model or not, but like the idea of like visionary integrator and like just right people, right seats. And you're right. I mean, more often than not, that is not where the owner should be spending their time, right? There are more valuable things that they could be doing. While this is a very valuable aspect of it, but anywho, I mean, you know, like, how do you start to evaluate who is the right person to scope out projects? Is it more on the engineering side because they've been doing it for a while? Is it a salesperson because they know how to like craft the story? Like, where have you found there to be a good fit, and identifying the right person?
It's a great question, and I think I'll answer it what happens typically first, and then I'll talk about how to make it more successful. Typically, we default to picking your most senior engineer, the one that you trust, that have started to take over the projects from the owner on actual delivery. And we try and repeat and recreate a minion of ourselves, a mini-me, and duplicate our skills rather than looking at how to enhance our capabilities. So what often happens is we've got a senior engineer that's less experienced than the owner, who's been delivering the projects that the owner's created and sort of translated it. So now we've got an even watered down version of what the owner was doing, and there's even less structure. And we often get worse before we get better at project scoping, because we don't have, often that engineer doesn't have as much experience as the owner. Right. So what often happens then is, the sales guys feel like they need to take over because the scoping takes longer. The owner already probably takes a month to turn around a proposal and a scope for the project. Now that engineer that's delivering it and having to deal with escalations and all that, now they're taking like 2 months, so sales gets more and more frustrated, and they'll rip it away and they'll start crafting their own story, which creates its own. Yeah, I mean, because
sales is waiting on the statement, like they wanted it the day they asked you for it, right? And most MSPs aren't prepared for that level of turnaround, and and especially with like the size of organizations that a majority of them are like, the ones that we're talking about, the majority of their clients are like speed. You have to have speed in order to, gain market share and, increase throughput of the projects you have going through your business. And like, I think you nailed several of those points. Like the idea of like a watered down engineer, right? Like it's like a painful thought, quite honestly.
And it's not fair on the engineer a lot of the time too, because
they don't have the tools.
Swing moment. No, because the owner hasn't had any methodology, they haven't really passed on any consistent way of doing things either. So that's where the engineer starts getting creative in their own way, and creating processes for themselves again. Right. It's not something that can be passed on to anyone else in the team. It's that specific engineer that all of a sudden all the projects revolve around. And the longer that happens, the less confident the owner is. And if that senior engineer moves on, then there's this big hole with scoping. So going back to your original question, like the best way to make this successful is actually put together a brains trust and create repeatable processes, and actually create a scoping process that takes into account the sales process, what conversations, what messages, like what you said, what story are we telling, and then actually looking at our project plans and what do we actually deliver so that we can create consistent scopes, and then have a scoping methodology that's quicker and easier. Like you just said, that speed of turnaround, it shouldn't actually be that important for what we're doing, but because we've set up our MSP to be a reactive sales engine, actually it is super important, because most of the time clients are requesting things when there's a immediate need, because that's how we've taught them to purchase. But once we turn that into a proactive mechanism, it doesn't matter if a scope takes 2 or 3 weeks to do, because we're actually selling before there's an immediate need. And that changes the sort of conversation, but you can't get there until you get the reactive stuff being done repeatedly.
Yes, I mean, and again, we're getting to like the fun part of the podcast where you like give us all the practical things, but you're giving all the practical things, like all the stuff already. So, right. Don't give us all the good stuff yet, James. But, like the piece around creating that brain trust, it's a really unique and great opportunity and great exercise to have an engineer that does the work, to have sales in the room, to have pre-sales, the owner, like, and you're right. Like we had someone on the podcast the other day, and it was unique because it was talking about the marketing function of go-to-market, and like how that is the starting point really for like okay, well, how do we talk about services? And if we talk about services this way, then we should have a documented process for it. And right, like having that documentation, it's not like a one-person process. It needs to be an organizational process that everyone can see and it's easy to understand, and and all that fun stuff. And I know there's a lot of work that goes into that. So I don't think either one of us are suggesting that this is easy. But I think the fruit from it is definitely worth the effort, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%. I'd say it is actually easy. It just takes time.
Yeah, it's not rocket science, right? Like, I mean, if you reference like again, EOS or something like that, like the EOS construct as a whole is like, it's not rocket science stuff. It's very much so like document the process, get the right people in the right seats, right? Create accountability. It's not new stuff, but I think it's a interesting way to think about it. Sorry, I interrupted you. Talking about something.
No, it's really about mindset. If we're caught in that reactive, we need to churn things as fast as possible because our clients requested something like 2 months ago and we've let them down. We get in that sort of guilt spiral. That's where we skip a lot of steps, and that's not good in project scoping and project sales, because that's where we often underquote everything by half, and we don't take into account things like project management time, the documentation work, all those non-technical things, because we just rush straight into how long is this technical piece of work going to take just so we can get a quote out the door and just live up to the sort of client expectations. Whereas if we slow down and we sort of get this brain trust happening, it's really as simple as getting like a weekly sort of project meeting going, talking about our pipeline, what do we need to scope out, what does that actually look like, and just break it down sort of step by step, and it sort of becomes repeatable just by doing that, even if you don't take any further steps.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just don't stop and really think about what do we actually do and deliver.
What are we good at?
Because we're very technical. Yeah, it's not even what we're good at. It's like, what do we actually have to do as a nature of MSP work? When I always ask people what sort of projects they do, they always sit there and struggle for ages till they start working it out and I start asking the questions, because I know it's very rare that your average MSP does anything special and unique. Most of the projects are the same across the world. It's just a matter of size and a bit of scoping. But we don't actually know what we do, because we keep seeing projects as these sort of one-off special instances that don't go well, where they should actually have the mindset that projects are one of the most important things we do. Then it flows from that mindset that we're actually investing time in what we do, where we're going to invest in time to do meetings, we're going to structure them out a lot better and get better delivery. And that just flips the script completely, because we default to support work.
Yeah.
And support work always takes precedence, but we never stop to actually think, if we successfully roll out a project, we're going to get less tickets.
Right.
Clients are going to be happier. All of those kinds of outcome-based things. We just treat projects as we have to do them because the client requests them of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a unique way to look at it, right? If the project goes well, you execute it well, the back end support of that, right? Lower cost to the business, less tickets, less truck rolls, or any of that stuff. But so what has been one of the ways that you have used or taught, and like, say you have an engineer, say you have the owner, and they know if they're going to do an exchange migration or whatever, like they have certain questions to answer. Like, what are some of the ways that you've seen be effective for MSPs to gather that information on the front end, so the scoping process can be easier and better? Because to me, like, that's a way that you create scale. Like, whoever's the right person, understands the technology, understands the services, it's accurate. Like, how do you get that person to scale? And my thought is, like, you got to get some of the stuff out of their head into some mechanism, right? So, like, what have been some of the ways that you've seen that work?
So often what I do, and I actually did it myself. So I'm non-technical person. I was the sales guy in the MSP that had to take over because scoping would take too long and
Yeah.
the owner would way underquote it. And I'd give him heart attacks when I quoted it out and still won the job. It's just like double what he was
Right.
scoping out. Um, and what I did to start with was take a step back and go, what sort of projects do we deliver? And then how can I make them sort of repeatable? So I've been around in the industry for a while, I'll show my age a little bit, but when we used to do like server projects, obviously servers were different. And being non-technical, I wondered why was it such a struggle for the techs to scope this stuff out? And I
Yeah.
realized getting so into the specific details of how much storage it needed, how much RAM it needed. And I took a step back and just sort of looked at it. Well, these types of clients were getting these types of servers. Why did it matter how much RAM and storage they got? Let's just overspec it. And the clients didn't know or care. But I could create a consistent, well, here's the solution for that type of client. Bang. So for like a 20 user site, they got this server.
Right.
That was it. And all of a sudden, that started to make the scoping process easier because then I only needed certain details. It was only like how many users,
Right.
what sort of functions did they have. If it was a normal SBS server, then they needed this. If it was they needed SQL, they'd need this kind of server on top of that, and blah, blah, blah. So we basically built that sort of blueprint for our solutions rather than scoping up each individual. And then that opened the ability for me to then create what I used to call opportunity surveys, and a little feature in ConnectWise that no one realizes in the opportunity. There's a whole survey feature where you can create a pre-built form.
Yeah.
And you could just have these questions listed. So then each sort of solution, I just worked out what questions did we know for that particular thing.
Right.
Even down to my favorite one is always UPSs. 15, when you go above a certain size UPS of 3 kVA, typically you needed a 15 amp outlet. The amount of times that we would sell these larger UPSs and they wouldn't have the outlets. All of a sudden, when we had that question, problem solved. We never had those wasted visits and looking like amateurs. So, like to me, it's as simple as understanding what you sell, creating a solution and a bucket for it, and then a method of repeatedly scoping it, and then work backwards to what questions drive that so we can have a successful solution.
Yeah, I mean that was like the purpose of our, so I used to do a lot of like wireless survey scoping and pricing, and so without talking about RF and without talking about all this stuff, like I really just need to know square footage and application type and like, the facility type. And with some of those basics, I could calculate how many APs I would need, and then I could estimate how long per AP to survey, how long per AP to install, like just all that stuff, right? I mean, it's the same thing, but the premise being it doesn't matter if you ask those questions if you don't have like a standard model to fit it into. So the standard services that you're talking about, or the server or the wireless survey or whatever. So that was one of the things that we wanted to build in, Scope Stack, which is like, how do I just have non-technical questions? Either one, just as an input that I could use as reference for scoping, or two, like programmatically recommend the services. Like go ahead and like choose the services for me based on how I answer them. So I, skip that step too. But in terms of like crawl, walk, run, I'll tell people all the time, like that to me feels like running, but like to me, like that's the end all be all sort of thing, right? The next phase is like, I'm just going to do a network assessment and then I'll recommend all the services that you need based on that. Like, I think there's a progression that'll happen there, but I think it's really interesting for sure. Like, where do we go with all that?
And to start with, it's a good exercise. And like, when I say that, it sounds like you're creating a lot of work, and it is a lot of work. Like we said, it takes time to build out this sort of company IP of how to scope up. But it's not as difficult as it sounds. Like, you don't need to sit there and fully engineer out your solution stack in one go. It's take the opportunity as new project opportunities come out, is to slow down and actually go, all right, what do we need to do to get this one right?
Yeah.
Then quote it, deliver it, learn your lessons, and then the next time refine it. Like, you only need to do it like 2 or 3 times, and you have it pretty well refined to then become repeatable. And that sort of simplified solution stack, the quoting time and the scoping time dramatically goes down. Like, back in the day, I could scope up a $200,000 deal in like 30 minutes, and get the proposal out, because all I needed was X amount of how many users, this is some of the functions, tick done, send it out. And that was a non-technical person doing it as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it takes time, but you have to put the effort in order to like get that scale and that kind of level of traction that you'd want to get to grow, So, well, James, I think, again, you talk to people all over the world probably pretty consistently about subjects like this. And so, like, what are 1 or 2 practical things? Again, you've already given us like just a ton of great advice, but what are 1 or 2 highlights, if you will, that you would suggest? Like, where do people start with all this stuff?
I think without repeating myself into like starting at creating your solution standards, one of the things I'd say is slow down. So you spend some more time and prioritize correctly. Yeah, you really do. You really do need to. Projects are really one of the most underperforming areas in the MSPs, and there's so much opportunity to make a whole lot more profit from them, not just from the projects themselves, but that flow-on effect to managed services. So it really takes that prioritization and mindset change to go, projects are actually one of the most important things that we're doing, and we need to prioritize our resources and our investment in that first. Because if we don't get it right, I see this time and time again in MSPs, we rush through the scoping, it impacts the project delivery straight away. Projects are unprofitable, and then we rush through that, don't deliver the project well, and then all of a sudden that flows into our support. So that impact to margin in a negative way can drag on for years without getting this right. It's not like we do a project and we stuff it up and we move on with life and we don't ever see that client again. We live with that client and their issues for years, typically. So we need to treat it that way and really get it right. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's great advice. Great advice. So, again, wealth of wisdom. We could probably talk on this subject all day long, and we're going to talk about some other topics here in another podcast. But James, if anyone wants to, well, let me go back and say, like, one of the things that I think about, you said, is that brain trust, and like I think about the actual meeting of having someone from engineering and sales and pre-sales and owner, like if anything, like start, like have that conversation, right? Understand what you're scoping, understand what kind of projects you deliver. The engineer in the room can validate, okay, we didn't do this well, and maybe there's some reasons there. So like, let's focus on this other stuff that we have some unique abilities around how we implement all this stuff. Like it's a good conversation in general to have, and stop operating in these silos, because it's a collective organization. It's not it shouldn't just be on one person, right? There should be a lot of work done collectively, and then again, one person's accountable for it. But at the end of the day, like it's a collective effort to get this done. So, well, James, if anyone wants to pick your brain on this, like I do all the time, or reach out, talk to you, learn more, like where's the best place to find you, and then tell us a little bit about kind of what you're up to these days.
Best place to find me is probably on LinkedIn, and follow me. I push out a lot of articles. I share these sort of podcasts out, try and share the wisdom to help everyone, because I lived through it. I'm sick of seeing people doing the same thing that I was doing like 10 years ago. So it's my sort of mission to see that not happening anymore.
Yep.
But the other way is to jump on the Pax8 website and go have a look at the Academy landing page and see the sort of education that we push out, again, trying to help the industry. I've been super busy with the Asia launch, getting information out there for the underserved market down here in ANZ and Southeast Asia, and trying to launch our peer groups and provide courses on top of the coaching that I've been doing for quite a few years. Very, very busy work, because a lot of MSPs need help, but I think everyone's coming to the awareness that actually we want it as well, and we want to develop our people and develop that sort of next level leadership.
Yeah,
so
and I think
I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I was going to say, and sorry to interrupt you, but I think a lot of stuff that you're sharing, I mean, it definitely comes across as like you just want to help, right? And I think the idea of us, coming together as a community and trying to solve these problems and work through it and work together is just like, you can tell when someone wants to do that and when they don't. And that's, one of the things I've always appreciated about you, James. Like, it's very authentic, and, and again, you've lived it just like we've lived it. And, we want to make a change. We want to make the industry better, and it's great stuff. So, well, man, I really appreciate you joining us on the InScope podcast. I know it's early for you, but probably something you do quite a bit of, honestly.
Oh, I've loved it. I could talk about this all day, and it was fantastic to be able to share some wisdom, and hopefully it helps some people out with where they're at and get better. And I want to see the industry get better, and we're so important. And I think one of the things to remember that I'll leave this final thought is we get a bit caught up in we're competing against other MSPs and things like that. There's actually not that many MSPs out there in the world. There's a lot, far more small and medium-sized organisations that need us to help, and we need to be doing a lot better job to actually help the economies and help those organisations leverage their technology better. So if we can start to get these fundamentals right, there's so much opportunity to make money and help people that we just need to get past a lot of these basic stuffs that we need to get right.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you heard him. Again, thank you for joining us on the InScope podcast. My name is John Scott. Again, we have some resources that are available as well. Go to scopestack.io. There's some SAO templates, about 52 of those that are pre-built out there, or you can sign up for a free forever account with us. But, again, we want to make your IT services scoping and pricing process better. And really this platform came from those of us that were in the industry having our own problems. So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, go to scopestack.io/podcast. We're out on multiple channels and you can subscribe there. But again, thanks for listening in, and we'll see you out there.